form. So now we're going to do a bit of a shift in that. So this is a presentation about my new book and about what I've learned about culture and particularly the culture and the art and the lives shaped by filigree while I was writing the new book. And to be honest, it was a kind of hard book to shift to writing, because the previous book that I published 2 years ago was called The Rubbish Picker's Wife, and it told the story of meeting Hatema, who was the first woman from the Ashkali community in Fushkasov that I met, and it was really from that friendship and what I learned about her and her family that all of our work with Tip started. And so to move from a story about rubbish picking to a story about silver felt like a little bit of a hypocrisy, or certainly a big jump. But actually, the more I learned about silver and the experiences that it gave me as I researched it and wrote about the book, the more I realised that actually these stories of all kinds of people in Kosovo, I mean, maybe not the poorest, but the miners who go down the mine in Trepča, where silver has been mined in Kosovo for hundreds of years, or the people, the craftspeople who are making the silver filigree that's now part of the beautiful cards that hopefully you've seen outside. I'm going to show you one now. Those are all part of the stories of Kosovo. They're part of what motivates me to stay in Kosovo, but they're also part of what we want to showcase about Kosovo's cultural heritage, about the reasons why people might want to come as tourists to Kosovo, and all of that is a part of supporting Kosovo's economy and ultimately making people there have economic opportunities and have a more comfortable life, whether they are rubbish pickers or the women who make these cards incorporating the silver filigree, or whether they're people of the middle classes but who are still in Kosovo struggling to have the kind of standards that we enjoy in the rest of Europe. So I have settled my conscience with how this book tells the story of Kosovo and how it supports Kosovo. And it's also been lovely that I've been asked to do a lot of these talks around the country. I think I've been booked for 50 now. I've done, I think, 6 of them so far. And at those talks, I sell my book, but I also sell these cards and also some of our bags and other products made by the women. And so the women who make these cards, as well as the craftspeople who make the beautiful silver ornament on them, are getting some support through those talks, as well as getting the word out about their products. So I'm kind of hoping that that's part of the process of making their businesses sustainable. And that's why it's really lovely that the embassy has offered to promote the book, but also the filigree on Wednesday, as a way of sending that message out to the diplomatic community and more widely to people who maybe don't associate Kosovo with pretty little silver things and have negative connotations about Kosovo's history or its war, or that the silver can dispel. So I actually start this talk always with just some images of Kosovo, because most of the audiences that I go to haven't ever been to Kosovo and have no image. Often the only one they have is of a column of refugees, which is a very powerful image and it's an important part of Kosovo's history and identity, but it's not the only story of Kosovo, and it's not a very up-to-date story of Kosovo. So these are some of the pictures. You'll have to give me your feedback, those of you who've been to Kosovo, how representative you think they are. I always include a picture of smoggy Pristina at the end, just to prove that I am being realistic. There you go. But just to give people a sense of this very beautiful country and the quest for the silver that informs my book got me to see all kinds of bits of the country that I probably wouldn't have seen before. But this is really where the story of silver in Kosovo begins. It's a place called Novo Brdo, or in Albanian they call it Artana, and it's a castle. As you can see, it is larger than Paris. Maybe you can't see that because maybe it isn't today, but in its day it was larger than Paris. It was an extremely important medieval centre. It was, in fact, it's mentioned in Dante. In fact, it's mentioned for forgery in Dante because it was known as a centre where coins were made that had 1/8 less silver than they should have done. And so it got a sort of a bad rep for being a centre for swindling. But it's still, the castle is there, and in fact the castle has been built up since that photograph was taken, since my visit there. There's been a reconstruction project, so there's even more to see, although not all of it is authentic. And there is a great opportunities for hiking and horse riding around it. You can see that despite the houses that would have been there in the time when it was larger than Paris, now all having gone, you can see that it's built on a hill, and the view from there across the landscape is really wonderful. And there's an initiative, a rural tourism initiative with homestays and guest houses where you can spend the night. And that's one of the businesses that the Ideas Partnership has supported in a very small way by the website that we launched last year called Sustainable Tourism in Kosovo, which just showcases 10 different places which are sustainable in some way. Either they're to do with pro-poor tourism, or they're environmentally very aware. And so do have a look, if you're coming to Kosovo, have a look at that website, Sustainable Tourism in Kosovo. It's a WordPress website. And see if you can tick off all 10 of them. I've only met one person so far who's actually been to all 10, so see if you can get the badge for that. But Novo Brdo is one of them. And this was the first place that I went to understand about the mining in Kosovo, from where the silver was brought out, and where there is still a mine active. So it's part of the Trepča complex of mines, which have 6 different locations, all part of the one business. And that mine has had a very big part to play even in Kosovo's recent history. It was certainly one of the prizes of the war, and it's been one of the disputed goods of Kosovo since the war, because it was a socially owned enterprise during Yugoslav times, and so inevitably everybody wants to have a piece of it. And it lay unworked for a long time after the war. And as it was unworked, the mines filled up with water, which meant that it then would need a lot of money to pump out. And so not all of it is now functional, which is one of those kind of effects that you don't think of in a war, but which mean that it might be that some of the silver that's there is never taken out. But the estimate is that there is 45,000 tons of silver still to be excavated. The flip side of that is that there is only 100 grams of silver in every ton of ore that is dug out. So the silver that's left is very inefficient to get at it. But given the price of silver, which has gone up recently, there is still a lot of interest in getting at that silver. And in fact, Prince Michael of Kent came over to Kosovo a few years ago with a party of potential investors, and they were looking at investing in the mines, in the Trepča mines. But in the end they didn't. I don't know what their reasons were. And so it's still a mine that is very, it hasn't got the investment that it needs, and it's not at the potential that it needs to be. And of course that leads to one of the many issues that Kosovo has with unemployment, because the mine used to be an enormous employer. It was the 3rd largest smelting capacity in the world before the Kosovan War, and it was one of the largest businesses in the whole of Yugoslavia, not just in Kosovo. So it was a real powerhouse of money and of employment, and so it is a real tragedy that it's not working. And one of the probably the most evocative and the most powerful experience I had in researching the book was going down the mine to see what the experience of mining was like. I've never been down a working mine, so it was nothing like I expected. For a start, it was huge. I mean, there were passages like as large as this room, and lorries coming past. It was like an entire underground city. I'd been imagining sort of just little nooks and crannies with sort of good-looking guys with sneery faces. There were some good-looking guys there. So it was a really interesting experience from that point of view. But also talking to the director of the mine about his experience really brought home the mine as a kind of metaphor and as the political implications of the mine. He had worked at the mine in Yugoslav times, and then was laid off in the 90s, like all Albanians were who worked in socially owned enterprises. And then after the war, it was the miners' choice to have him back as a director. But by that time, the mine was very divided, because there are still some locations which are in the north of Kosovo, which is the Serbian-dominated and a lot of it under Belgrade control. And so there were actually two offices working two different parts of the mine. So there was the big question for him, the big moral and political question about whether he could or should collaborate with the Serbian part of the mine in the north. And he described that how on the first day in the job, he got a phone call from the director of the Serbian part of the mine. And the guy said, "Are you wanting to collaborate with us?" And he said, "Yes." And the guy said, "Well, then we need to see proof of that, and you need to come over to the north part of the city right now." And he said that at that time, the tensions between the north and south of Mitrovica, which have been going kind of up and down over the time I've been in Kosovo, sometimes breaking out into violence and sometimes just a kind of a slightly icy atmosphere. He said that things were really at a peak, and he really wasn't sure if this was actually an invitation to kind of kidnap him or to threaten him in some way. But he also really wanted to show willing and to show what could be achieved for the workers in the mine if they did work together and share material and share machinery and share information. So he told his secretary that he was about to go to meet with this man. He said, "I don't want you to tell anybody," because he knew that there would be repercussions if people got to hear about it. He said, "If you don't hear from me in an hour's time, then call the police." So he crossed up to the river, and then he had to leave his car, because there's all this business with number plates in Kosovo, and you don't want to have the wrong number plate on the wrong side of the city. And he crossed the bridge walking and was met by the director of the mine in an unmarked car. And he described how frightening this whole experience was, and whether he was wondering, how long had it been and when would his secretary be going to the police. And the director bundled him into his car and drove him off into the wilds, because it is quite, the scenery just north of Mitrovica is quite wild. And he didn't know where they were going. And then they turned up at a restaurant where he was given this huge lunch. And there were miners in the restaurant who were Serbian miners who he'd worked with before the war. And he rang his secretary very quickly to say, "I can tell you're not going to hear from me for a while, but it's because it's a good reason." But he said, the kind of fear that he had to go through just to do something reasonably sort of straightforward, like collaborating with a colleague in the mines, was a great reminder to me, who came to Kosovo in 2006, that those divisions and those challenges for some really basic things and for the economic prosperity of Kosovo are still real issues. So I'm just going to read you the very brief paragraph that I wrote about my experience going down the mine and what I thought, how it made me reflect on Kosovo as a whole. So that is where Kosovan silver comes from. It's born in fear and hard graft, dizzying depths and glinting rocks. It's born from unlikely political alliances and men trusting one another despite the odds. And somehow they emerge, those 100 grams within a ton, and they're refined and transfigured, and they form the smooth, bright stream I wear around my neck. So that experience gave me this kind of background to, it might just be a pretty shiny thing that I'm wearing around my neck, but actually there's a history here. And I wanted to learn more about what that history was. And the next place you have to go for the history of silver in Kosovo is Prizren, which I'm sure that anyone in the room who's been to Kosovo has been to Prizren. It's Kosovo's kind of showcase city. It was the former capital of the Vilayet of Kosovo. It became, Pristina became the capital when the railways came to Kosovo. Because if you draw a straight line from Belgrade to Thessaloniki, you'll see that it doesn't pass through Prizren at all, but it does pass through Pristina. So Pristina is the sort of Swindon of Kosovo. It's this railway town that was created capital just because of that. And Prizren got all the advantage, at least the aesthetic advantage, because as you can see, it's a very pretty old town that didn't have to accommodate a railway going through it. If you've not been there, you can see that it's got this wonderful old mosque right in the middle and a lovely Ottoman bridge. But maybe you can also see on the hillside is a Serbian Orthodox church, and Prizren is the site of one of Kosovo's UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which is a Serbian Orthodox church. So it's got a real mixture of influences and a lot of history there. And so it is the real centre for handcrafts and all traditional crafts. And as you may know, my second book, so the one before The Rubbish Picker's Wife, was about the British explorer called Edith Durham, who travelled to Kosovo 100 years ago. And she spent a lot of time in Prizren and did a lot of shopping there. And she describes, she says, "I wandered up and down the dark bazaar, glowing with goods." And this idea of the bazaar glowing, I found very evocative and exciting. And in fact, it was Almaza, who is here with us today, but Almaza was my first friend in Kosovo. We were introduced through Almaza's niece, who used to be my pupil when I taught in Hackney. And so when Marigona, Almaza's niece, heard that I was moving to Kosovo, she very kindly put me in touch with Almaza and said, you know, there'll be somebody who can meet you. Almaza came to our hotel, I think, on our second day and said hello. And so it's really lovely that she's now working at the embassy and she's in London and I'm still in Kosovo. We have But I just really remember, and I mentioned this in the book, Almaza, that when Almaza's brother got married, which was the first Kosovan wedding I was invited to, Almaza says, we've got to go to Prizren to buy all of the brides, the jewellery and the gifts and the outfits for the family. That Prizren is the place that you would go for those things. And so, of course, in my book, that's the next place I went to find out what happened to this silver once it had been extracted from the rock. And I went to, well, that's what happens to it, but how does that transformation happen? You know, how from a long, it comes out in long sticks after it's been processed and everything. It's about this long, about a foot long, and it's about as thick as your thumb, and it's a very dull grey, kind of like gunmetal grey stick. It really doesn't look anything like that, and you can't imagine that it could ever be transformed into that. And so I went to find this filigree cooperative who work to transform, first of all, the sticks into wire and then the wire into this. And I know that some people in the room have been to that cooperative, but I'm not sure who. So Keith, you went, and you, Coxie and Graham, you went, and you went as well, right? Okay. So I'm telling some people some things they don't know, but not everyone. And you've not, Rika. Well, then you will this summer. The wire is produced through an extruding machine, which, and it was an amazing process watching that being made. So this stick was pushed into a machine, and they pulled it out the other side, and they showed it to me, and they said, "Look." And to be honest, it looked a lot like the stick that they just pushed into the machine. I was like, well, maybe it's a little bit longer and a bit thinner, but, you know, it looks pretty much the same. They said, "Okay, watch." And then they put it through and pulled it out again. And I was like, yeah, it's definitely longer and thinner, but not really, you know, very impressive. And then they did it again, and again, and again, and they ended up having to pull this wire actually around their body and push it in again and make it longer and longer and thinner. And in the end, this stick of metal was turned into 60 metres of silver wire. So if you can just imagine, A, how fine that must be, but also how crazy it was as they were sort of plucking it from the air and trying to organise it into this skein. So they produced the wire of differing thicknesses, some of it really as fine as a human hair, and some of it, you know, a bit more like the wire that, well, you can see in here the different kind of thicknesses. And you can also see in here, and I won't go into the details, but the different techniques that are used to the different components that are then put together to make all kinds of different products. The name filigree comes from the Latin filum, which is the thread, and granum, which is the bauble or the grain, literally, the little blob. So you can see in this piece the combination of the filum and the granum, these little blobs like the one in the middle and the ones in the centre of the flowers around the edge. But as well as the filum and the granum, there are particular techniques that are used. The extended or the distended spiral that you can see is used in the petals of the large flower is one very typical technique. And then the other one that, if you just look at this piece here, you probably at first glance it just looks like lace or just looks fiddly. Your brain can't work out how that scribble is fitted in. But actually, as you start looking more carefully, you can see that there's a repeated, like a kind of ram's horn or a double spiral, a bit like the symbol for an old camera film, and that's what's used in a lot of the gaps to fill in the spaces. So here, for example, you've got a distended spiral, but then at the top you've got some of those double ram's horns. So that's another one of the techniques. And then you can see there's twists here, which make it very pretty as well, and I'll show you a few of the other. But the actual process of how, so I worked out how the stick became the wire, but how did the wire then become a flower? So I was told to go to this filigree factory, and it's really stuck on the outside of Prizren. If any of you do want to go there, then you're going to have to ask me for a phone number, because you'll never find it, and nobody knows where it is. It's actually an old cigarette factory. So, and it's really old. It's sort of 1950s, really dilapidated, kind of a bit spooky. And you walk down this path, and you've got old greenhouses that still have really leathery old bits of tobacco leaf hanging up in them. And it's a very atmospheric place. You go up the stairs, and there's a sellotape note on the door that says, filigree. You can't print it. It doesn't seem like it's very plausible. But you go in, and I'll just show you a few more pictures of what they produce. And you can perhaps start to see some of the techniques that I was talking about if you're looking for those those double scrolls for the spirals. And that's an older piece, but still using the same techniques. But you go in, and this is the workbench that you see. I love this photograph, and I love this workbench. For a start, there is always a cup of tea. You will notice on all the photographs I'm going to show you, there is always a cup of tea. One of those very pretty little Turkish-style bardak of tea. And it's proper with a little slice of lemon in it, as you can see. And it's served to everyone who comes. So the guys and women working at their workbench always have their cup of tea. But there's something a bit more strange on the table that you can maybe see. I don't know if anyone can identify. Maybe even the people who've been to the workshop might not have known what this was. Anybody know what that is? It's a rabbit's leg, of course. Because apparently, and I've been told that that's not just in Prizren, some silver workers in this country as well, use a rabbit's leg as the ideal brush to brush up the silver, the solder, the powder that is sprinkled onto the jewellery to hold those little infill places that I was talking about in place. I suppose it's something about the hairs on it, and they have to be careful that they have to find something where the hairs aren't going to have static on them that would then keep the grains of silver. Anyway, it's a really revolting piece of offal, and it's just always there on the table. And so the first stage that the craftspeople do is to make these little frames of, in this case, of flowers, like the ones on the cards that I showed you. And they take a flatter piece of wire, so a kind of tagliatelle rather than spaghetti piece of wire, and make those outlines. And then, having made the spirals or the ram's horns or whatever, or sometimes taking these little lozenges, which are flat metal cut into shapes as well, then they fit them into place within the frame. And then, as if it's like fairy dust, they take a sprinkle of that powder and sprinkle it on to the pieces, which then need to be soldered into place, which is when the men and women turn into dragons. Because, amazingly, they use this fire, which is mouth regulated, so they use their own breath to regulate the heat and the direction of the fire. And I think this is just a wonderful image. But you can see they have still got their cup of tea there, which is good. and with that fire, they solder each individual piece, and making sure that each individual spiral is in the right place within each piece. And when that's finished, the result... Oh, sorry, I haven't got a photograph of it, but the result can look a little bit... I mean, it's not very beautiful because it's blackened and scorched. So it then has to be cleaned, and it's put into cups of hydrochloric acid, and then into bicarb, and then they use a hairdryer to dry it, and there's a whole process. But what I love about it is, even while they've got the cups of hydrochloric acid, they've still got a cup of tea. And I hope that there's never a nasty mistake with that, because it looks like an accident waiting to happen. Anyway, it comes out shiny, very, very white and shiny. In fact, sometimes, like with the earrings that I'm wearing, the shiny metal is then blackened. There's an artificial black put on it to give it a slight, because it can be a little bit too white, the whiteness. And so depending on taste, some people actually then blacken it. So this is an example of the, this is a cigarette box. And you can see some of the other techniques there. The one here, which is called mouse tail, you can see the reason why. Looks ever so simple, and it perhaps doesn't even look like it's worth calling it a technique until you have a go at it, where there's a special tool for it, and I sat swearing and making mistakes for a long, long time before they laughed at me and I gave up. But you only need to sort of sit and swear for a few minutes before you get a real appreciation for the minuteness of the craft and the effort that's gone into it. And this is a talisman, a haimali, like an amulet, that was actually given to me by the cooperative in Prizren as a thank you for trying to promote their work. And you can perhaps see that there's a little thing that enables you to slide a panel at the bottom of this. So it's not flat, but it's a very shallow box. And it's a tradition that's used by Christians and by Muslims to have a triangular amulet. Triangles are always good for seeing off the evil eye. And inside it, they would put a piece of paper which might have a prayer or a piece from the Bible or a piece from the Quran or a Muslim prayer written on it. So I, in fact, I'm not a Muslim or a Christian, but I've got my goddaughter Adena, who wrote me her name one of the first times she wrote it. I put that inside like a good teacher. Actually, on the subject of my goddaughter, I'm very excited that I've got my other goddaughter here, Annie, because this book I dedicated to 5 people, my 4 godchildren and my nephew, and I had 2 of them in the room here today, including Annie here. So that felt very special to have the dedicee right in the room with us. There's another really beautiful piece that's made, and you can see the same. Maybe you can start to develop a bit of the vocabulary of all these pieces. I included this one because you may be familiar with this Hand of Fatima, as it's called, which is across the Muslim world. It's again worn to see off the evil eye. Sometimes it's hung outside a house or in the car or in a necklace like this one. And that's a Muslim symbol. But it's also interesting because... Oh, I thought I had a picture. Okay, but I also have an image of a piece made to hang in a church. And the cooperative in Prizren are in fact all Muslims, but they work on both Muslim and Christian and other artifacts. And in fact, it's one of their, I think it's a thurible, is that what you call it, that you shake, or a censer, that is used in the church, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in the chapel of the Orthodox Church. That was made by this group of Muslims in Kosovo. And I find that rather wonderful, that you've got a group of men and women working on beautiful pieces that are used, in devotions of all for all denominations and all religions. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that it's in gold, which is very rarely seen in Kosovo now, gold filigree, because it's just so expensive. But originally there would have been a lot of gold work. But even those who were rich enough to have everything in gold, and if you were rich enough to have everything in gold, you did have everything in gold in traditional costume, and you'd have necklaces with coins hanging off them, and you'd have a big belt, and you'd have earrings and necklaces and bracelets and rings and every possible adornment. But you would always make sure that you had at least one piece that was silver, because silver in itself was said to see off the evil eye. So it has this property as silver. And of course it has been proved that silver has antiseptic properties, and it's used in, I think the NHS use it in dealing with MRSA, for example. It's obviously expensive, but it does have antibacterial properties. So maybe there's some sense in seeing it as something that could see off the evil eye, even if you could afford gold for everything. I've included these pictures here because, again, you can probably spot the same infill techniques. But those were made by a young woman who has a workshop in Pristina. And she's one of a new generation. There aren't many of them, but there are a few single craftspeople. In fact, a couple I've visited are both women. And they've learnt their craft not at a certified school, like they used to be in Yugoslav times, but just by seeing the designs of others, following family tradition and teaching themselves, and are using it in very modern ways. So you can see these pieces are very funky bits of jewellery, but they're still using the same techniques of filigree. And that is probably what's going to keep filigree alive. There's a few, that's another piece with very traditional setting, but then this huge chunky lump of stone in the middle makes it a very modern piece of jewellery. But the issue that I found was that the cooperative in Prizren were not doing funky, chunky jewellery, and they weren't doing anything that was, what they were really aspiring to was pieces like this. This is a model of the house of the League of Prizren, which is a very famous house for Albanians because it's where, in the 19th century, Albanians met for possibly the first time to think of a pan-Albanian national consciousness and the idea that there could be an independent Albanian entity, maybe just within the Ottoman Empire, but that there could still be an Albanian identity that challenged the Ottomans. And so the house itself, the site of that, is a place that people go to visit in Kosovo. You might have been there yourself. And the Filigree Cooperative has made this extraordinary model of it, which is about this size. And you can see the amount of work that's gone in it. You can imagine just how much it costs. And you can imagine how much it weighs. And you can imagine that actually there's probably not many people who want to buy that. Anyone who's got an amount of money that it costs, hundreds and hundreds of euros, is probably going to spend that on, a new Mercedes. And anybody who is a traveller or a visitor to Kosovo isn't going to want something that's not very portable and that they don't really understand the significance of, because that building is significant for Albanians but not so much for foreigners. But while I was watching them make this building, and others like it, I could see that there were these really lovely little components which to me, with my taste and my budget and my need for portability, seemed like a lot better option to sell. So I talked to them about whether we could make these cards, the ones that we're now selling, and that although it wasn't big money for them, one of these flowers cost €1.40. So it's compared to the cost of that huge house. But if we could start to generate a bulk trade for them, then that would be good for them. But also that it could give an income to the women who are in Janjevo who sew these into the cards. So the cards that I showed you have got just a few stitches that stitch the ornament into the card, which means that it's then very easy for the ornament to be taken off the card and used as a pendant on a necklace, or hung from a Christmas tree, or kept as a keepsake or a charm or whatever. And so by buying a card, you're also giving somebody a gift along with the card. So I had this idea that this would be a way of promoting the craft. And that's what Sapun has now, that's our newest product. And it's been going very well, and we have had lots of orders. And when I do my talks, people are interested in taking that away, I suppose, as a kind of keepsake from the talk. And I should say, since they're going to be on sale outside, that the books are £7.50 and the cards are £3. But if you buy a book and a card, then it's only £10. So, just think about that. Anyway, these are some of the other designs that we trialled. And then the other thing that I was trying to suggest to the cooperative, where, by the way, you can see they still have a cup of tea in them. These are each taken at different visits, was that in themselves they could become a tourist attraction, because whether people wanted to buy the big house or the little flower or whatever, the act of making this filigree was so extraordinary that it's something people would pay to see. So they weren't ready for the idea of people paying to watch them at work, but they could see that if people came to watch them at work, they might then want to buy things from them anyway, and they're extremely hospitable. So we tried to promote it as a tourist site, and it's one of the other sites of the 10 that are on that website that the Ideas Partnership have produced. And this, you can see, is our two visitors. This is Nicola, in fact, who some of you know from previous Supporters' Day events, when they came to Kosovo, of course, coming and watching the filigree being made. I think that's Andy having a go at doing mouse tail, and I think he failed as well. And then John McCarthy from the BBC contacted me and said that he wanted to do a programme about Kosovo. And I said, well, if you're going to do a programme about Kosovo, then you've got to come and see the filigree. So he did a really great piece on Saturday Live about Kosovo. And that brought, again, more promotion for Kosovo, more promotion for filigree, some status for both in the eyes of Radio 4 listeners. And I wrote about it in my book, Edith and I, before I'd even thought about writing The Silver Thread as a way of trying to promote it as well. So I just want to check how we're doing for time now, because, I think I might skip telling you about this. You might just have to read the book if you want to know about that. And the second series of photographs, there's a few pictures here, are of textiles rather than of the silver work. Because what I realised once I developed a kind of eye for this technique that I saw being used in all these beautiful items was that it's actually the same technique that's used in a lot of the beautiful textiles. So this is from a yelek, a little waistcoat, and you can still see this idea of the spiral that's being used with silver thread. I mean, in this case, it may not be actually silver or gold metal, but sometimes it is, and very often Kosovars are very proud of their wedding outfits and spend a lot of money on them. They also, I'll tell you that in a second with this picture, the reason that there are so many women wearing the decorated waistcoats and the longer coats here and here is that when you buy your dress for your wedding dress, it's not just a one-off that you would wear that outfit. You get the chance to wear it when you go to somebody else's wedding as well, which I think is a really smart idea that we should probably adopt in this country. And it does mean that there are then these wonderful displays, but you can also see just how much jewellery, not all of it, filigree in this case, is worn, that the filigree and the jewellery is a very important part of all of these outfits. Necklaces and waists, whatever things are on your waist, and all of the earrings and big brooches and belts. So what I love also in my talks is to share not just the art of the filigree and the history, but how it's used in Kosovo today and how that's a part of Kosovan identity, and not just how Kosovo has shaped its silver, but how the silver has shaped Kosovo and people's lives in Kosovo. That's another, you can see there not just the detail on the waistcoats, but also the same kind of lacy detail, I think it's called oya, that's, I don't know, we have a word for that in English, that kind of lace work that's down at her cuff and down her sleeve. But it's really pretty. And I'm going to end, I think, with a photograph that Elmaze will remember, which just proves, it's a picture from my very first summer in Kosovo, and shows that my willingness to engage in Kosovan culture, but my not always success. I hope I put it in this one. Oh no, hang on a minute, you've got another picture to come. That one, by the way, is made, that's not silver, obviously you can see, that's copper, and that was made in Albania, and it was made in the time of communism when there was a real scarcity of expensive materials, and that copper was taken from the electrical wiring factory and then used to make this copper filigree. But I've never seen it done nowadays. I suppose it just wouldn't fetch the price that would make the work worthwhile to use copper for it. You might as well do it in silver. That's a cigarette holder. It's another one of these more modern brooches using the same techniques but in a different design. That's the tool that you use to make that mouse tail that defeated me. And this is a picture of the a celebration in Albania, in the mountains of Albania, where the traditional costume, including all of the filigree adornments, is judged. It's kind of like a beauty contest come fashion show, but all in traditional dress. There you go. And very, very beautiful they look too. And this is at the Ethnological Museum, which I'm sure that everyone who's been to Kosovo has been to, but where they have a wonderful selection of filigree that's also in the book. I don't can get to show that photo, Almaza. I'm going to have to show you. It's of me dancing at my first wedding that I went to, and not particularly successfully. Anyway, that gives you a sense of, hopefully, of the way that silver is threaded through. It's threaded through Kosovo's history, through its politics, through its ancient history, through its more recent wartime history, and now through the history of the people who are working to try to keep this craft alive and to try to survive, to use it as a way to survive economically as well. So it segues very well into the auction, because as you know, we've got some beautiful pieces of silver of filigree that are made in Kosovo that are some of the auction prizes.